I booked the Airbnb last minute for a work trip. Hotels in the city were either fully booked or way out of my budget, so I found this small standalone house just outside town. Nothing fancy, just a single story with a porch, a patch of dry grass out front, and no visible neighbors. The kind of place that felt like it hadn't been lived in for a while. The host wasn't there to greet me, but he left the key inside a lockbox near the door. As I stepped inside, the smell hit me first, something sterile like cleaning spray and wood that hadn't been aired out in months. The living room had a brown leather couch, a coffee table, and an old flat screen mounted on the wall. Everything looked functional, but unloved. Then I noticed the note. It was taped to the mirror above a small hallway table. White paper, bold black font. Important. If you hear knocking after midnight, do not open the door. Ignore it. That was it. No welcome message. No list of amenities, just that. At first I thought it had to be a joke. Some edgy Airbnb host trying to create an experience. But there was nothing else in the house that suggested humor or creativity. No quirky decorations, no house rules in a cute frame. Just that one printed warning, dead serious, like a sign on a chemical lab door. I walked through the place slowly. The kitchen was outdated but clean. Faded linoleum floors, yellowing cabinets, a fridge that hummed a little too loud. There were 3 wall clocks in the house. One in the living room, one in the hallway, and one above the bed in the small windowless bedroom. All 3 ticked in perfect unison. All 3 were analog. I don't know why that stood out to me, but it did. There were no family photos, no personal touches. The books on the shelf were mostly technical manuals, plumbing, carpentry, electrical wiring, a few titles in German. The Wi-Fi worked, the lights worked, the water was hot. I had no reason to complain, but I kept thinking about the note, and about the way every clock in that house was ticking at the same time to the second, like something or someone had made sure of it. By nightfall, I was settled in, or at least pretending to be. I made a quick dinner, microwave ramen and some sad trail mix I found in my bag, then sank into the couch with the TV on low volume. I wasn't really watching anything. I just didn't want to hear how quiet the house was. Outside, the wind picked up. The house sat on the edge of some undeveloped land, so there were no fences or streetlights, just tall weeds and scattered trees. Every time the wind moved, the trees shifted like figures waiting in the dark. I kept the blinds half closed. At 11:38 p.m. I turned off the TV and went to brush my teeth. The bathroom mirror was still fogged at the corners, odd since I hadn't used the shower. I wiped it down with my sleeve and caught a glimpse of myself. I looked more tired than I felt. Back in the bedroom, I lay down and stared at the ceiling. The clock above the bed ticked softly. I turned off the lamp. A minute passed, maybe 2. Then, I heard something. A knock. 3 clean knocks on the front door. Knock. 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 Deliberate. Not loud, not frantic, but definitely a knock. I didn't move at first, just stared up at the ceiling in the dark, my heart picking up speed. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the wind, or some branch scraping the siding. I held my breath. Knock, 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 again. Same rhythm. Same calm, measured tone. I sat up in bed. My phone said 12:04 a.m. The message came back to me, clearer than anything else in that moment. If you hear knocking after midnight, do not open the door. I didn't. I stayed right there, barefoot on the floor, staring down the hallway toward the living room. I couldn't see the front door from the bedroom, but I could picture it. The narrow, frosted glass window, the weak porch light flickering behind it. Someone was standing out there. Or something. The knocks didn't come again. But something else did. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Against the glass. Fingernails, maybe. Just light enough to make me question if I was hearing it at all. I inched down the hallway slowly, careful not to let the old floorboards creak. The tapping had stopped, but the porch light was still on, casting a weak yellow glow through the frosted window on the front door. I stood far enough back that no one could see me from outside, or so I hoped. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not boots, not heavy. Just soft pressure on wood. Someone walking along the side of the house. Deliberate. Slow. They passed by the window near the kitchen and I instinctively ducked. There was no shadow. No figure. Just the sound. The footsteps continued. Toward the back of the house. I crept to the kitchen and peeked toward the back door. The one I hadn't touched since I arrived. It had a bolt lock and a chain, and beyond it another frosted pane. I held my breath. Knock, 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 now from the back door. There was something deeply wrong about the knock. It wasn't urgent. It didn't rattle the door or demand attention. It was casual, patient, like whoever was on the other side knew I was there, knew I was listening, and didn't care if I answered. They weren't trying to break in. They were waiting. I backed away from the kitchen, keeping to the wall. Every instinct I had was screaming to grab my bag and leave, but where would I go? The house was surrounded by woods and dark road, and something told me opening that door, even to leave, would be exactly the wrong move. I turned off the kitchen light. The knock didn't come again. But then I noticed something else. The clocks had stopped, all three, dead quiet, their second hands frozen at slightly different positions, like they'd been paused mid-tick. The house was completely silent now. Even the wind outside had died. And then, my phone buzzed. A new message from the host. Stay inside. No matter what you see or hear, do not speak to it. I stared at the message. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't know what to type. What was I supposed to say? Too late? Is this a joke? I never got the chance to respond. From the corner of the living room, I heard a soft sound, like fabric brushing against glass. I turned and followed the noise until I reached the window closest to the couch, the one with the half-closed blinds. There was a small gap between the slats, just wide enough to see outside. I leaned in. There was an eye. Not pressed against the glass, not wide with menace, just there. Calm. Watching. Still. The lashes barely moved. I stumbled backward, knocking over the coffee table. The sound echoed like it didn't belong in the room. By the time I looked again, the window was empty. Just the porch light flickering in the distance and the night pressing against the glass. My phone buzzed again. Don't leave until sunrise. It loses interest when ignored. I stayed on the floor for what felt like an hour. I didn't check the clocks again. None of them were ticking anyway. My phone had no service now, but the last message sat there like a commandment carved in stone. I didn't hear any more knocks. No footsteps. No tapping. Just silence, so deep it made my ears ring. A few times I thought I saw shadows moving just outside the windows, but I never looked directly. I didn't want to give it that satisfaction. Sometime around 5, the clock started again. All at once. Same time. Same second. The tick-tick-tick returned like a pulse, and for the first time all night I felt something close to relief. By 6:12 a.m., sunlight spilled across the porch. Real sunlight, cold and gray, but enough. I gathered my things with shaking hands, left the key in the box, and drove away without looking back. I messaged the host 2 days later, just to ask what that thing was, why the rule existed. He never replied. In fact, his listing disappeared completely from Airbnb. I still wonder, what would have happened if I'd opened the door? We booked the place because of the bathtub. That's how it started. My girlfriend saw the listing on a travel blog, a small house on the edge of a coastal town, nothing around but dunes and pine trees, and one of those huge clawfoot tubs in the bathroom. It looked private, peaceful, just remote enough to feel like we were getting away from something. The host, a woman named Evelyn, left the key under a flower pot. We pulled in just before sunset, and I remember thinking the house looked smaller than the photos. Narrow, stretched in a way that didn't match its angles. There were no other homes in sight, just a gravel road that disappeared behind the trees. Inside, everything was clean but strangely empty. The furniture looked new, but there were no personal touches, No books, no magazines, no little signs saying live, laugh, love. Just blank walls and the faint scent of bleach. We unpacked in silence. There was a weird heaviness in the air, like the walls had been holding their breath before we arrived. I chalked it up to the long drive, the quiet, the way everything echoed a little too much. The bedroom was at the back of the house. A single window looked out onto a patch of dying trees and tall grass. No blinds, just sheer curtains that didn't do much once the sky got dark. I made a mental note to close the door before we went to sleep. Something about that window made me uneasy. Around 7:30, we heard a knock on the front door. Not forceful, just a light, hesitant tapping. I opened it to find a woman standing there, probably in her 60s, wearing a loose sweater and holding a small dish towel in her hand like she'd forgotten she was still holding it. "You just got here?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "We're renting it for the weekend." She gave a slow nod, like she already knew, then said casually, "You're the first ones who've stayed more than a night," and walked away without another word. We didn't talk about what the neighbor said until later. At first, we tried to laugh it off. Maybe she meant people don't usually rent it for long. Maybe she was just nosy or lonely, or one of those people who always says weird things without realizing it. But the way she said it, flat, matter of fact, like she'd already decided something about us, stuck with me. That night, we filled the tub. The water took forever to get warm, and the old plumbing groaned like something alive was moving through the pipes. We took turns soaking while the other scrolled on their phone. The signal was awful, and the house Wi-Fi kept cutting out every few minutes. By the time we went to bed, the silence outside was total, not peaceful, empty, like the entire world had turned its back on the house. No crickets, no wind, just the occasional pop from the wooden beams as they settled. I woke up at 3:12 a.m. There was a sound, faint, repeating. A creak. Pause. Another creak, like footsteps, in the hallway. But we hadn't left the door open. I sat up slowly, ears straining. The creaking stopped. The room was completely dark except for the soft glow from the bathroom light we'd left on down the hall. My girlfriend was asleep beside me, breathing steady. I got up, stepped quietly onto the cold floorboards, and opened the door. The hallway was empty, bathroom light still on. Nothing looked out of place. I stood there for a minute, not moving, waiting to hear it again. And I did, but not from the hallway. This time it came from inside the wall. A soft scraping sound like something being dragged. Then a thud. Then silence. I backed into the bedroom and shut the door, heart thudding in my chest. The house was old. Maybe it was rats, or a pipe shifting, or whatever. I told myself anything to keep from waking her up and admitting I didn't want to be alone with it. Eventually, I fell back asleep. But in the morning, the first thing I noticed was the chair by the window. It had moved. Just a few inches, but enough that I could see its outline in the dust on the floor from where it had been the night before. Neither of us remembered touching it. We ate breakfast without saying much. Both of us kept glancing at the hallway. I finally brought it up. What I'd heard in the night, the chair, the woman at the door. My girlfriend didn't laugh or brush it off like I expected. She just said, "I didn't sleep right either. Something feels wrong." I messaged the host. I kept it vague. Just asked if there was anything unusual about the property, if maybe it had a history. I didn't expect a response. But an hour later, Evelyn replied, "Nothing to worry about. Most guests leave early. You're doing fine." No greeting, no smiley face, just that. I read it 3 times. The wording felt off. Most guests leave early. Not cancel their booking, not cut the trip short. Leave. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but I didn't. I didn't want another message like that. Instead, we decided to leave the house for a bit. Get lunch in town, breathe something other than filtered air and quiet tension. But when we backed out of the driveway, we saw the neighbor again, standing at the tree line, watching. She didn't wave, didn't smile, just stood there with her arms crossed, watching us leave. I tried not to make eye contact as we pulled away, but my girlfriend glanced back and whispered, "She was standing in the exact same spot yesterday." We stayed out for a few hours, had lunch, walked around town, tried to reset. It almost worked. The air felt lighter away from the house, like we were stepping out of something thick and invisible. But the whole time, I kept thinking about what Evelyn said. "You're doing fine." Like it was a test. Like we weren't just renting the place, we were enduring it. When we got back, the house looked darker. Even with daylight, the windows were dim. The air was warmer than it should have been, like someone had left the oven on. We opened the back door to let some air in and saw it. A narrow path barely visible between the overgrown brush leading into the dunes. We hadn't noticed it before, and it didn't show up on the listing photos. But now it was clear, flattened reeds, soft impressions in the sand, like someone had walked it, recently. My girlfriend turned to me and said, "There's something out here." Not a question, a statement. We didn't follow the path. We shut the back door and locked it. I pulled the curtains across the windows, even the sheer ones, even though they didn't really help. My girlfriend sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor like she was trying to remember something she hadn't learned yet. Around 6 p.m. the lights flickered. Just once. Then again. I checked my phone. No signal, no Wi-Fi. Just a spinning wheel. She stood up suddenly and said, "The bathroom." I followed her without asking. We both stopped at the doorway. The bathtub was full. To the rim. Clear water, still and quiet. We hadn't used it that day. The faucet wasn't dripping. And worst of all, I had unplugged the drain that morning. Neither of us moved closer. We slept in shifts that night, both too wired to fully sleep. Every time I woke up, something was different. The closet door opened just a crack. A book on the floor that hadn't been there before. A drinking glass on the windowsill. By 3:47 a.m., I stopped checking the time. It didn't matter anymore. The house was moving things, and we weren't alone in it. Just before sunrise, we heard footsteps again. Not inside this time, outside, moving through the sand around the house. Slow, pacing. As if whatever it was knew we weren't asleep and didn't care. We stayed frozen in bed, the covers up to our chins like children hiding from monsters. And for the first time since we arrived, I realized something truly terrifying. I didn't know where the neighbor lived. We'd never seen a house nearby. Not when we arrived, not during our drive through the woods, not even when we scanned the horizon from the back porch. When the sun finally broke through the curtains, we didn't speak. We packed in silence. Left everything that wasn't essential. We didn't even lock the door. As we were pulling out, my girlfriend looked back one last time. "She's in the house," she whispered. I didn't ask who. I didn't look. We just drove. We haven't spoken about it since, but sometimes late at night I wonder, did we leave her behind or bring her with us? Have you ever stayed somewhere that just felt off? Would you have opened the door or stayed another night after what they experienced? Tell us in the comments. If you've had a weird Airbnb or hotel moment, you're not alone. We want to hear everything. And if you love true style horror like this, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next story.